everybody. Thank you for being with us today. And again, this is one of our first webinars, so we hope this goes off without a hitch. We have sent the materials that are on our TV to everybody. Please write in with questions and comments. If you can't see anything or if you can't follow the materials that you have at home. But welcome. This is a webinar on reserve study, insurance for the uninsurable. My name is Erum Kistemaker. I'm the managing partner with Kistemaker Business Law Group, and we have the lovely Anastasia,
hello,
who's actually going to be chiming in with regards to reserve studies and reserves in general. Anastasia works with expert inspectors, and she's going to start the presentation.
So that's great. You get the technical side of it, and you're going to get the legal side of it at the same time. So reserve studies, we're just going to jump right in here, guys, because there's a lot of information to cover and we don't have a lot of time. The insurance for the uninsurables. Let me just give you a brief explanation of what is a reserve study.
Oh, and maybe before we get into it, I'm sorry. At the end of it, we have sent to everybody registration and certification, acknowledgement of attendance. So after the presentation today, please send in that form so then we can provide the CU credit for all of the CAMs. Board members and people that are watching this just for the educational purposes, you don't need to worry about the CU credits, but please do send us back that form so we know who attended, so we can keep doing these webinars. And at the end of the presentation, we'll go through our saved dates. We are doing another one next Friday on replacement cost valuation. We have some other great webinars coming up.
Okay. So you ready?
Without further ado, we're getting to the meat and potatoes.
All right. Insurance for the uninsurables. Yes, you can insure a lot of the components that you have on your reserve studies, but what the insurance for the uninsurables entails is you can't insure the replacement of it if it is worn out. It is only if it's a disaster. So that's what that little phrase kind of entails. Reserve study is a long-term budgeting tool utilized by common interest communities, which provides a long-term timeline of costs and days for replacement of common area components. Basically, it is a funding plan that is going to give you the amount that you're going to need when certain components come up for replacement. Common areas are defined in your docs in the state statute. What it entails mainly is your roofing, your fence, your roofing, your paint, and your pavement are the main three components that you should be concerned with. Fencing, pools, spas,
clubhouses,
pavers. I mean, all these common area components. Anything over $10,000 should be included in your reserve study. Now, you can use your clubhouse as an entity if you have $3,000 in furniture, you have $6,000 in equipment, and all these things add up to your $10,000 or over. You can use that as one entity. It can still be broken down and still be covered underneath your reserve study.
So maybe for everybody that's watching that, especially condominium CAMs and board members out there, you get to the reserve study because Florida statute requires that condominiums reserve fund for three main areas: roofing, paint, and paving. Because you have to do that, it is always wise to get a reserve study. And what Anastasia is going into detail about is the actual study that is performed by companies similar to her company that put out the studies that help associations with the formula and sort of the realization of what it takes to either replace these budgeted items for replacing the roof, replacing the paint and the pavement, and any other building component that's in excess of $10,000. So let's talk about that. An example of that.
An example is the clubhouse. If you have a clubhouse and then you have a kitchen, you have pool table, you have furniture, you have office equipment and a workstation, you have I've seen some that have video games. I mean, things of that nature that all adds up to, you know, they have wet bars, they have bathrooms, all that adds up to what would exceed the $10,000 mark for that line item. So you list those things out as subcomponents, and it all ends up being under that one clubhouse entry. But you still have the schedule of when each item should be replaced. So you have the useful life and you have the remaining life, which we'll get into later, for those components. Okay, so we're going to talk about what a reserve study, how it's completed, because there are several steps on how a reserve study is completed. The first thing is the component schedule and analysis. The component schedule consists of all of the common components for the association. Of course, your paint, roofing, and pavement, as we've talked. It will include your pools and spas, your equipment such as generators, AC units for common areas, fire suppression system, sprinkler system for landscape, things of that nature. If you have a lift station, if you have a water treatment plant, which I know a lot of our condos around do.
They do.
And then you have your miscellaneous property components, which could consist of piers and boathouses, docks, gazebos, walkways, wooden walkways mainly because the sidewalks go underneath the pavement area. If you have gyms, outside gyms, which I've seen a few of the associations have outside fitness areas,
Right.
playgrounds, dog parks, things of that nature.
Elevators for many.
Elevators is equipment.
Okay.
Yeah, anything mechanical usually goes into the equipment side.
Okay.
So you have your component schedule, again, which is comprised of all of the components that are a responsibility of the association.
So when you go out and you're hired to do a reserve study, who prepares the component schedule for you all?
It all depends, because whether we're doing a level 1, level 2, or level 3. A level 1, we go over every component. And a level 2, they usually already have their component schedule and they're fine with it. They haven't added anything, they haven't taken anything away. Level 3 is just an update, so, and we'll get to that later on too. But as far as comprising the component schedule,
Yes.
that is usually my responsibility. And that's why I meet with the board members and the CAMs, so we can make sure that we have each and every component listed and we don't waste anybody's time.
Now, is there something that we can impart to the CAMs with regards to the component schedule and something that they should be doing, whether they've been at a property for a long time or they're taking over a new property?
Absolutely. The main thing is, CAMs, please make sure that you're familiar with your docs, because that is going to tell you what your association is responsible for. Some associations are responsible for garage doors, where it's dictated in the docs that some associations are not.
So when she's saying be familiar with your documents, what she is stating in particularity is read through your declaration. Not your bylaws, not your articles. Your declaration is your sort of leading document that states what the responsibility is of the association to repair, replace, and maintain. And it's literally in a section in the declaration that reads, usually in the heading, repair, replacement, and maintenance. Whatever the association is responsible for repairing, maintaining, and replacing. Windows, doors, pool, roof will always be a common element in a condo scenario. Paving, painting, that will all be dictated in your declaration, and that's how you come up with your component schedule. So again, you hit it on the head. Very first thing for CAMs to do, get that declaration out, highlight, and make almost like an exhibit or a schedule that lists all these components that the association's responsible for repairing, replacing, and maintaining.
Right. And while we're on the component side of things, let me just give you guys a little bit of information about what has been trending as of late.
Okay.
As of late, and it has been suggested, not told or said by the state that including your insurance deductible as an allowance in your reserve study is a grand idea. In the event you have a disaster, you are uprooted from your owners are uprooted from their properties. Your insurance policy, of course, is going to kick in, but you have a deductible. Some deductibles can be up into the millions of dollars, depending on the size of the association. If you have the insurance deductible in place in your reserve study, you may not have it completely funded, but you will have a startup, so the special assessment for the insurance deductible will be minimal. So that is a good point to remember. When you're compiling these component schedules, that is one of the major things. In the same aspect, you have a disaster. Hurricane cleanup is expensive. It's very expensive. It can go up into the hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on the nature of the disaster.
And what's also smart for us to do, we get so caught up on hurricane.
Right.
We can have other storms, other sort of acts of God, similar to COVID. You know,
Exactly.
It did not necessarily affect associations that hard right now because we're getting back to business. Seems that people are paying their assessments. But yes, many of us community association lawyers are talking about, hey, do we also have to fund for other disasters outside of hurricanes? Hailstorms, really bad,
Fires.
tornadoes, fires. So I like, if they are going to do a sort of component or reserve fund for disasters, they define them broadly.
Yes.
Acts of God, all disasters, not just hurricane, but what I saw a lot of associations do after the last two hurricanes, they defined it in such a narrow manner where it is just related to hurricanes. So just kind of keep that in mind, and you agree.
Yes, I agree. And you can name that line component as, disaster contingency. You can name it as, disaster fund. You can name it just disaster. And then that gives you a broader view. Now, in the same respect as what you were speaking of about what we're dealing with now with the pandemic, another thing, the third point that I wanted to make about the component schedule is in your major components, and in any component really, you can have a contingency percent added to the current cost of that component. What that does, and it's an optional up to 100% contingency you can put in there. It is a safety net for the delinquencies that are brought on by certain things like the pandemic. You can add a 3 to 5% contingency to your paint, roof, and pavement. Your paint, roof, and pavement. And that way you know that if you have delinquencies, at least those three things will be funded.
Fantastic, and we know that we're getting questions, and we will be getting to the difference between component and pooled budgeting a little later in our discussion, and that's a very good question.
Right. The next thing is the financial analysis that is in your reserve study. The financial analysis is going to take into consideration your reserve assessment per unit, per month, and per year. It's going to take into consideration your balance as of that moment that you start the reserve study or at the beginning of your fiscal year, whichever is chosen. It is going to take in any special assessments that you have already in place, any special assessments that you are looking to put in place that year, which is what we're trying to avoid. And it's also going to take into consideration any interest rate that you accumulate on your reserve balance.
And maybe we clarify that for those that are not well educated in the area of reserves. What you just said, the whole point of this is to avoid having to specially assess your unit owners in a time of need. So what that means is if you reserve fund as you're supposed to for your roof, roofs are very expensive to replace. They can be upwards in the millions.
Oh, yes.
If you don't reserve fund properly, you're going to have to assess your owners to replace that roof, and each owner could be assessed hundreds of thousands of dollars. And what if they can't come up with the money?
Exactly.
It's not a wise thing to do. You should always reserve fund, and you really can't do a proper reserve funding formula without a reserve study, because you need component schedule, component analysis, and a financial analysis. And you, CAMs and board members, you want to rely on experts who do this day in and day out. You don't want to come up with the formulas or make any errors, because then the CAMs and or the board members can be sued individually for breach of fiduciary duty if they're not doing it correctly. The job of the board members is to hire the experts to do the work and provide the reports to the board.
Right, and your reserve study is not your budget. I just want to make that plain.
A good point.
Your reserve study is not your budget. It is a living, breathing document that will change on an annual basis. It is not to be considered set in stone. And it is up to the board to make the proper decisions on the funding amounts and the funding schedule for that association. Okay, so the last thing is the funding plan. The funding plan in a reserve study will give you a 30-year outlook of what funding needs to be set aside to replace, repair these components that you have listed. Some components are dictated by the docs,
right?
What I understand. Some components are not. Some boards elect to put different components in, more components in. I haven't seen a lot of boards elect to remove components. So that's a little bit of information there.
Why is the funding plan on a 30-year plan and not 50 years, not 15 years?
I can't answer that. I have no idea. That's what it's always been from
30 years.
From the minute I started, it's always been a 30-year
I
plan.
assume because the three categories are roof, paving, and paint, it must have been when the statute was written and they put those as the three main components that you have to reserve for. They must only have a useful life of 30 years.
Well, some roofs have a useful life of 50 years.
Right.
Some hardy board siding has a useful life of 50 years.
But then you still always do it on a 30-year?
It might be that they were taking into consideration the building codes changing.
Something.
So, yes.
But always the funding plan is done on a 30-year.
It's done on a 30-year basis. Okay, so...
Did I skip one?
Next one. Nope. One more. Alright, additional elements. Okay, so this is what your reserve study should entail. The date of the study, which that's a no-brainer. Reserve account balance, which is what we just spoke about. Your percentage of the fully funded balance. Now let's expand on this just a bit. A percentage of your fully funded balance is, you have your fully funded balance, say you have a fully funded balance at $100,000. And your reserve balance as of now is $80,000. So you are sitting at 80%.
Okay.
Okay. So once you are sitting at 80%, now again, this is the state recommendation. They like to see your reserve balance at a healthy percentage rate of 70 or above. Many associations do not operate on 70%. They operate on 30 or 40%, which is dangerous because that, and this is going to take us into a whole other category here, which we'll elaborate again on later, that will take you into lower property values. That will take you into a higher risk of special assessments. That will take you into a risk of not getting your insurance policy reinstated. There's a lot of repercussions if you don't keep that percentage up. And again, we'll touch on that again later when we get into the other parts of it. Okay, the interest and inflation assumptions. Reserve studies are based on a 3% inflation per year. Sometimes that is increased, Sometimes that is decreased depending on the association. That is another variable.
Now, since this is another variable and because we're in sort of an odd economy at the moment, when you are going to do reserve studies that are coming up, will your inflation increase because of COVID and the economic impacts that it's had? And how would you know if you're supposed to or not? Does the state give some sort of guidance with regard to that?
The state does not give a huge amount of guidance for reserve studies at all.
Okay.
What is going to happen as far as the way I do it, because I do it differently than most on purpose. What is going to happen is when I meet with the boards and I meet with the CAMs and we see how the economy's going, you know, we watch the stock market, we watch, you know, the shortages and things of that nature, and we make educated decisions based on what's happening at that point.
And obviously for within our little world of community association law, you must also speak to contractors saying, hey, if they change their roof now in 2021, how is that going to be different from 2018? And I bet you there are going to be differences.
There are going to be differences, and it's just like I was having a conversation with one of my clients yesterday, and they couldn't figure out why the roof started out at $330,000, and when it became time to replace it, it was at $420,000.
It was because it was
and it was
years
because
later.
of the inflation,
Yeah.
and it was many years later, and it's a 3% compounded that we add in there automatically.
But it may not be enough in
It
some.
may not be enough if we have a storm and plywood goes up 30% like it did the last
Well,
time.
and contractors increase their prices, so you've got to keep that in mind, and that's why your reserve study should be updated every year. Because Anastasia and expert inspectors and other companies that do this, they rely on the data that's provided on the date of the study. So the replacement cost of a roof on the date of the study could be $330,000. But if you have to replace it 2 years from now, it might be $500,000.
Exactly.
It's very variable, but that's why it's very important to get your reserve study updated every year. Work with qualified experts that know how to easily update that and are really sort of in the loop with the industry.
Right, and since we're on the subject of the updates, the system that has been devised is when you first start out to get a reserve study, usually when you have a new company come in and do it, you'll start out with a level 1. The level 1 is considered the full reserve study. It is going over line by line with the component schedule, doing the site visit, taking an assessment of the condition, running the figures, doing the funding plan, and working with the first draft all the way to the finalized copy. The level 2, which this is going to get a little confusing because the level 2 is not always needed.
Okay.
A level 2 is what you do last. So if you do a level 1, and then you come back the next year and you do an update, and then on the 3rd year you do an update, on the 4th year
You do a level 3.
you do a level 2.
Oh, okay.
You do a level 2 because a level 2 is a site visit to document any material changes in the association. So during the 2nd year, if we had a hurricane and you had a new roof put on, or the 3rd year, we had a hurricane and you had a new roof put on, you would need a level 2 on that 4th year.
Because you need a site inspection and you made a change.
Yes, yes. And then after the 4th year, you go back to a level 1 because everything's going to change on that 4th year, and that is the protocol for when the construction costs actually start changing drastically enough that you need to go back and start over.
So associations, if you have a reserve study because there are no statutory requirements on how often you need to have a reserve study. In fact, the statute doesn't even speak to the requirement of a reserve study. They speak to the requirement of having reserves. And really, you cannot properly reserve fund without a reserve study. But it is very important not to rely on a reserve study from 2016 unless you're updating it, because your budgeting for reserves is probably going to be deficient in some manner or form.
Correct. So if you follow that schedule, then you will stay as closely as possible to your funding needs. Okay, so now we're on to what it is and what it is not. A reserve study is a budgeting tool. Now, tool is, as you see, capitalized. It is not your budget. A reserve study professional will not do your budget for you.
Right.
That is left up to your association and your camp. It is utilized for a long-term allocation for the reserve account. Now, some confusion has arisen about the differences between operating and reserves. When I do a reserve study, I hand them a report, or I email it to them, a report that has their contribution per unit per month in it. That is just reserves. It has nothing to do with operating costs at all. Your operating is completely separate. It is added, your monthly operating expenses are added to your reserve expenses. Your total is your assessment for the month. It's a timeline.
Should I pull up my budget that I have on mine so they can kind of see?
Yeah, sure, that'd be great.
Great, I don't know how to get.
Can you get to it?
I can.
Okay. Maybe not. Erum has come up with a great budgeting tool
I can't get it on.
presentation, and it will be available. If we can't get it up, it will be.
That's odd. There we go.
There it is. This is chock full of information about the statute, about your budgets,
Where's
and
the
how to.
slide.
You,
Ooh.
wow.
Okay.
All right.
So here is what the estimated operating budget would look like. And see, this is all operating. Notes to the budget, and then there is the reserve schedule, which is separate from the operating budget.
Yes. So as long as you remember that those are two completely different entities.
It's at the reserve schedule does not feed into the operating budget, which was at the top of this.
No.
Here, right. So here's the operating budget at the top, notes to budget, and then there is the reserve schedule.
Yes.
You've got the total estimated useful life, which would be written here, estimated remaining useful life, estimated replacement cost, estimated fund balance, annual funding, capital. These are all the things that Anastasia fills in. Do you want to add anything to this?
No.
I just put the three main components.
Right, and that's a good place to start because you can always expand on that.
And then here's just, we can go over this at the end, and we will
Right.
send this to everybody, but the legalities with regards to the statutory requirements for budgeting for the reserves.
And if you don't mind, Erum, while we're talking about statutes just a minute, would you please reiterate about commingling the monies?
They can't be commingled with the exception of investment funding.
Thank you.
And I think I have that highlighted.
Oh, we got 47 people watching. Yay.
Wow.
That's awesome. Okay, so another thing that a reserve study is, it's a timeline for expected common area components, expenses, including related expenses. So, for an example, you have an elevator, and your elevator is going to come due for modernization in 10 years. Now, modernization on an elevator, and again, we can go down a really big rabbit hole with this. Modernization for an elevator is different than replacement of an elevator. Modernization, and it's defined differently by different companies, just so you guys understand. There is no one true definition of modernization. Historically and generally, modernization includes cosmetic work on the cab, like replacing the buttons, the walls, the lights, things of that nature, and the electrical components inside the cab. Your phone, your panels, the emergency call buttons, things of that nature. And all of those installations and electrical installations.
That's
running
all modern.
wires.
So then do they have to make a separate line item for
Yes.
modernization because modernizing
Yes.
is not replacing?
Yes. Well, you don't have to, but it is a good idea.
Because oftentimes associations will need to modernize, especially if you're switching from elevator company to elevator company. They will
Correct.
require it and say, oh, well, all your sort of technical components like the phone, the panel, those are outdated. You don't need, it works fine,
Yeah.
but we will not work on your elevator. We won't even sign a contract with you unless you modernize it. Now,
Right.
technically, you can't use the reserve funds for that modernization. Then you have to do a special assessment, which is why, from a legal perspective, based on what you're saying, I think it would be wise to have a line item for modernization in conjunction with the replacement.
Absolutely, and that was what the point I was going to make. You have a line item for modernization, and then you have a line item for when it needs replaced. Now, replacing an elevator could include the pump, the lines, the pulleys, the motors, all of the mechanical areas of that component that you don't need to replace as often as you need to modernize. So, including the related expenses, that phrase right there could also mean installation and wiring of wall sconces. Because if you take a wall sconce out of the wall, you're going to have to put some new wires in there. You're going to have to redo the outer edges of where it goes onto the wall. So you have all these other expenses incurred on the replacement of these components that you have to take in consideration. Another good example is roofs. If you live in a tower, if your association is a tower,
Okay.
you have to take into consideration mobilization of the equipment for replacing the roof.
Such as
Cranes, even marking off streets to get the equipment in and stopping traffic. So you would incur costs for police officers. You would incur costs for
moving cars to another parking area because it's going to take up a lot of your parking spots when they're doing
exactly
any work on your roof.
right. And barricade companies, you need to include that.
Possibly owners saying, well, we can't live at our condo anymore because we have nowhere to park. So now possibly costs for their displacement, having to go to a hotel.
Well,
Does that work in there?
I've not dealt with that part yet. The only thing that I've dealt with is the mobilization.
Okay.
I've never heard of anybody having to actually move out of their condo because of
A roof, but
right.
we have
That's
had
only a
scenar-
disaster.
Right.
Yeah.
But we have had scenarios with paving, with
Now paving,
where we've had to move people out. They couldn't do the work with people living in the condo.
right, and you know that displacement could come into play. I mean, you're correct; it could. Generally, it doesn't. But you do have extra incurred expenses. To rent a crane, for a roofing company to rent a crane for a day is in upwards of $50,000. And that's on top of what the roof itself costs.
Which is why you want them to be able to come do their work pretty quickly. You don't want to do the work during rainy season, which is coming up, because what happens is if it's raining, they can't do their work. Now your crane's just sitting out there and you're paying for the crane and all this equipment every day. And they will have built into their contract that they don't have to do the work during that time. And it will be built into the contract that you're responsible for paying for those costs. So it's very, very important that when you sign these contracts, you seek legal counsel and you really think these things through when you're doing these big replacement sort of projects.
Exactly. And there's also debris removal. You know, you have to pull off the old roofs, or has to be a dumpster there.
Yep.
To remove the old roof debris before they can put the new roof in.
And these are all things that you consider where we see where a lot of association boards are doing their own formulas and coming up with what is needed for the reserve cost. They just say, oh, okay, well, it'll probably be $100,000, but they're not taking into consideration these other contingencies that you know to take into consideration.
Well, you can't really just Bubba it. You know, Bubba is going to cost you $100,000 to, and I hope nobody's named Bubba, I'm not trying to offend anybody, to replace this roof. But if you don't take all this into consideration, you are going to end up with a special assessment. And that's another mistake that many of the boards are making, is they think they can get things done cheaper. Cheaper is great if it entails the entire replacement, the entire operation, not if it just entails buying the roof. Okay, so the third thing, we're not to that yet. There we go. The third thing is an indicator of where the association's funding level is in relation to the account balance. This is the percentage we were talking about earlier. Again, it is suggested 70% or better. Now, I don't know of any association that runs over 90% on a regular basis. Any.
And what do you mean by that?
90% funded. And we'll get into the whole 100% and fully funded later. But a healthy percentage in this day and age and by the state is considered 70% or better.
So then what you're saying is most associations should be getting a vote from their owners where they are funding at a lower level than fully funded.
Exactly.
And or are waiving their funding. Their funding is reduced.
Right.
And the only way that you can't reserve at a fully funded level is by way of a vote of the owners every year.
And that comes from your attorney. Having a lower level of reserve funding is always dangerous because it is going to increase the risk of special assessments. It's going to lower your property values because real estate agents use these. They use these to sell units. If you're not funded at a high enough percent, then your condo or your townhome could be worth less than what you actually paid for it. The insurance companies use these percentages to write policies because if you're not funded at a certain percent, the insurance company has every right in the world to say, we're not writing you. These percentages don't seem like a very important piece of this, but they really are. The goal is to get to the 100% mark. Not every association is able to do that right off the bat. You can do, and this is another thing that has been very trendy as of late, you can do an aggressive funding plan. Now, this is not a special assessment. An aggressive funding plan for your reserves is not a special assessment because, Erum, you can't do a special assessment to fund reserves.
No, you cannot.
Right. Okay. So in that respect, you can do an aggressive funding plan for a year. You can increase your assessments on your reserve schedule for a year, and then on your update, you can reevaluate, and then you can drop them back down.
Right.
So that is the way that a lot of associations are going right now because they're realizing they're 20 and 30% funded, and they're getting nervous. They're getting very nervous. And
rightfully so.
Exactly. All right, so now we're on to the 3 important questions. These are the questions that you need to ask yourself about whether or not it should be included in the study. Is the component the responsibility of the association? And that is from the docs, like we discussed before.
Yes.
That's pretty self-explanatory. Does the component have a predictable, useful life? Yes. Roofs have predictable, useful lives. A useful life is how long it is predicted to be in working order, in operation. This can change according to where it is, what zip code it is. An association in Ocala, the spa pump and heater will not wear out nearly as fast as a spa on the beach. The roof in Brevard County will wear out faster than one in downtown Jacksonville because of the sun, because of the elements. So your useful life is always a variable when it comes to location. Does the component have a predictable remaining life? Same aspect. If you have extreme weather, if you have extreme salt air, if the elements or any of the conditions around that component are in an extreme manner, then it could wear out easier and need replacement sooner. So if somebody says to you, oh, that fence is going to last 30 years, and in 15 years it looks like it's falling down, it is 9 times out of 10 because of the elements, because of the usage. You know, if you have a high traffic area on a parking lot, that overlay is going to wear out a lot quicker than if you have one that services 5 parking spaces.
Now, do you always use the same statutorily mandated formula? Because this is what's interesting in the law. Reserves that are not statutorily mandated, the roof, the paving, and the paint, things like we were talking about, the insurance deductible, components that would cost less than $10,000. Reserves that are not statutorily mandated are not required to be based on any specific formula.
No, they're not.
But that is something that I feel like a lot of CAMs don't know. The formula must be used for the statutorily required reserve items. But you can use whatever formula you want for those additional items that you're adding.
Yes, you can. Personally, I suggest, and professionally, I suggest that you use the same formula.
Okay.
That will give you a more true reading of when you're going to need to replace that component and how much longer you have and what you need to put into that reserve account to fund that component. When we do our reserve studies, we also give a component by percentage of the assessment. What that means is you will get a chart that shows you that the roof is going to take 20% of your assessment. The paint is going to take 5% of your assessment. And you can figure which ones you want to use that formula for, other than the ones that are mandated.
Right.
To fund those components.
And just something important to point out, not only do CAMs need to be familiar with 718.112, they also need to be very familiar with the administrative code when it comes to reserves. And that section is 61B-22.005. It is very important to be familiar with the administrative code because when there's disputes over reserves, it goes to the division, the administrative agency that is over condominiums, and they heavily look to their administrative code. So it's not just the statute that has a lot of sort of requirements when it comes to reserves and your budget. It's also the administrative code. So I do want to point out it's 718.1122 in Florida statutes, and it's 61B-22.005 for the administrative code.
Okay. So now we're on to...
Do we want to talk at any go into any detail with regards to the difference between a capital expenditure and deferred maintenance, because both of those categories are what we reserve fund for. It's not just deferred maintenance, but you also reserve fund for capital expenditures.
Correct. Which would be considered your roof, your pavement, and your painting, because those are the capitals. Those are the big ones.
So 718.112F2 actually defines what a capital expenditure is and what deferred maintenance is.
Correct. Would you want to read that for us?
So in addition to, when you're doing your budget and you're sitting down, in addition to the annual operating expenses, which is in your operating budget, the budget for a condominium association must also include what we showed you, the reserve accounts for capital expenditures and deferred maintenance, which is defined in 718.112F2. A capital expenditure is any expenditure for funds for the purchase of an asset whose useful life is greater than 1 year in length, the replacement of an asset whose useful life is greater than 1 year in length, or the addition to an asset that extends the useful life of the previously existing asset for a period greater than 1 year in length. All defined in the statute and also the administrative code. And the administrative code that speaks to it is 61B-22.0012. Deferred maintenance, however, is any maintenance or repair that will be performed less frequently than yearly, and B, will result in maintaining the useful life of an asset. So
Correct.
slightly
So
different.
let me give an example
Please.
of that deferred maintenance. Seawalls.
Okay, good example.
A seawall, an association will not completely demolish a seawall and redo it.
Right.
So a seawall goes under deferred maintenance because you have to repair the spalling. You have to do dredge work to make sure that it doesn't erode out. And you have to paint it. You know, you may end up actually having to rebar it. I know that's probably not the proper technical term, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yes.
It is the maintenance of it to keep it up to code, keep it up to speed, and prolong the life. Because that is one item that, unless the hurricane takes it out, no association is going to demolish their seawall and redo it.
No. I'm not even sure that you can completely
You
do that.
can.
It would cause damage.
Well, it would cause damage, and it would be outrageously expensive to do it that way. So the deferred maintenance on a seawall is what you would put in your reserve study. Now, that 9 times out of 10 will go underneath an allowance. So while we're here, I'm going to go ahead and explain allowances. Allowances on your reserve study are to extend the life of a component until complete replacement is necessary. That is the official description of it. Seawall repair allowance would allow you to have funding to repair the spalling on that seawall, to have it dredged, to take care of the erosion problem, to do landscaping around the seawall if necessary, to paint it, to rebar it as we talked about before, to add to it if necessary, if it needed to be thicker or it needed to be taller because of the changes in the landscape. There's so many different ways that those allowances can be used. We use allowances for sprinkler systems because sprinkler systems, you replace 5 or 10 heads every 3 or 4 months. So you don't want to fund $10,000 over the period of 1 year for 5 or 10 heads. You want to fund $25,000 over the period of 10 years in order to replace those heads as necessary. So the allowances are another variable that can give an association that extra security and extra cushion for those things that needs to be replaced but not completely replaced. Okay. So we're ready to move on? And that's the state statute.
This is sort of what I went through.
What you went through. Yes, please, please, please read your statutes. And if you don't understand it, Ask an attorney.
Go to your lawyer because CAMs, you do not want to commit the unlicensed practice of law. And I think most CAMs who are interested in watching this educational seminar, webinar, you know sort of what you're allowed to interpret, not allowed to interpret, and you're not really allowed to interpret Florida statute and analyze how it would be applicable to the association.
Okay. So any questions that you have about the statute needs to go to an attorney, and because we can't answer them.
Do we want to kind of just take a quick, we're wanting to ask our dear Cindy Delecki, who's taping us today, have we gotten some questions?
So you've answered a couple questions. You've got the one question, component versus
We're going to
pool.
get to that.
You're getting to that one.
It is separate way of calculating when you're doing it for pooled versus the component.
Right. Well, you basically calculate it the same, but it's handled differently. I mean, there's a lot
and
of
the statute and the administrative code actually tell you how to do it, which is fantastic.
Yes.
Anything else?
No, everyone is very appreciative and
awesome.
says that you guys are doing a great job. So keep up the good
Do
work.
we need to slow down a little bit?
No, we worked with the volume on a couple of people, so that was good. They can hear better now, and that's it.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to go into the whole plan ahead icon as you see up here. And that's basically what this entire reserve study is about planning ahead.
So, in that vein, how much does a reserve study cost?
It depends on the size of the association.
Okay.
It depends on how many components they have. It depends on if they had one before. It depends on how cooperative the board is.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of variables
But
there. Generally, our base price is around $1,500
$1,500
Yes.
for a level 1.
for a level 1. That's the base.
So I feel that because reserve studies are so integral for condominiums, they should already have that in their operating budget to have a level 1 done. And then how much is it to get the updates yearly? Because now I think every association should have a line item for that every year.
It is a portion of what their level 1 costs. I mean, since they're all different, I can't really give you a figure, but I can tell you that the last one I did, and I can't tell you who it was, the last one I did, their update was $1,100.
Okay.
So, but they had 3 pages of components.
Right.
So that's a lot.
But we're not talking big money here.
No, you're not talking an engineering report.
No, right, which could be upwards of $10,000.
Correct, and that's another point that I would like to make. A reserve study is a non-invasive inspection. It is not an engineering report. It is not cutting out a piece of the wall and seeing if there's falling on the inside. It is all visual.
And I do want to make a point because we may have some homeowner association driven CAMs listening to this.
Yes.
This is quite condo focused at the moment. There is a sharp contrast between condos and HOAs when it comes to reserve funding. And the contrast is that the requirement for reserve funding, it's not there for the HOA. You only have to reserve fund for items that were set by the developer, and if the developer made reserve funding mandatory. So 720 is very different than 718 when it comes to reserve funding. And the administrative code, you don't even look at it when it comes to the associations because the administrative agency in this code only applies to condominiums. So I do really kind of want to, HOA CAMs may be getting frustrated. Why aren't they talking about HOAs? But there is a stark contrast there. And you really have to be familiar with your documents when you're an HOA because we have had HOAs that didn't even know that they had to reserve fund because they didn't know that the developer had set these mandatory reserves, and they find out about it 15 years later. And they haven't reserve funded at all, and it causes quite a bit of an issue.
A huge issue, actually. And getting back to the HOAs, I do a lot of HOAs for reserve studies because they're smart. Not because they have to, but because they're smart. Because even in an HOA, you can end up with a special assessment if the pool breaks down, the clubhouse needs a new roof, things of that nature that is inside responsibility of the HOA.
Now, what's good is if your developer does initially set mandatory reserves, then the
Absolutely.
formula is similar, and the statute to read is 720-303-6D. And if reserve accounts are established by the developer initially, they are then generally governed by the same procedures as described in the condominium statute in 718-112.
Okay. Yeah, if your homeowners association did not set up guidelines for reserves, I would suggest that you get with your attorney, you get with your board members, and you lay forth down some
And the important thing
ways
to
to
read
move forward.
is, again, your declaration, what duties the homeowners association has to replace, repair, maintain, as well as that initial budget that's part of the initial filings prior to sales being made. There's always an initial budget that's attached to the prospectus.
Yes.
That's the important budget to look at because you'll see the line items and the separate budget for the reserves. That's how I sort of unwind it. I go to the deck, I go to the initial budget, and
Right.
determine what the developer initially set for reserve funding. Now, you probably won't have a huge common element roof unless you've got nice amenities like a clubhouse, a pool,
Yeah.
tennis courts.
Right.
Some HOAs really don't have that, and
Community centers.
right,
Yeah.
and they're not gated, so they don't have the issue of paving their roads
Right.
or painting. So the homeowners associations to really be concerned about the reserve funding are those that are gated and have a lot of amenities like
The
pools.
higher end ones, yes.
Right.
Yes, the ones that are gated, and then you have gatehouses, you have piers, you have docks, you have pavilions, you have walking trails, and you have, all sorts of things. You have,
But for some of our small
Playgrounds.
associations in town that don't have that, they still have the requirement of stormwater retention,
yes, you have retaining
drainage.
ponds, you have signs, monument signs. Monument signs are
Right.
getting very expensive this year.
That's
I'm not
true.
sure why, but they are. You have, okay, there's a question.
Yes, Susan is asking if you start reserve funding for an HOA, you should continue doing so every year.
Absolutely.
Yes. Now, so the difference is there's reserve funds that are initially set by the developer. Those become mandatory. But the board of directors can also vote to reserve fund. Those you don't need to follow the formula for because they're set by the board. They can be reduced. They can be waived. Those can be treated at the discretion of the board of directors. So, I guess to answer Susan's question is, if they were established by the board, then how to maintain those funds is also at the discretion of the board with minimal homeowner input because they're set by the board of directors.
Right, but you should still continue to fund them at a certain percentage every year.
Unless the board of directors takes a vote by a majority of the board of directors to not fund them. Now, that's a different question than what you should...
That will still risk a special assessment.
Doing a special assessment. So you may have some homeowners associations whereby the owners are like, we're wealthy, we can tackle any special assessment, and we don't want to give the association the money. But what happens is sort of the culture of associations changes over time with every sale that's made in an association. So you really just have to know your association. From a legal and a business perspective, we always think that it's wise to reserve fund because it's just that. It's insurance for uninsurable events.
Exactly.
And outside of a disaster or a casualty, insurance isn't going to kick in.
No,
So
when your
normal
roof
wear
wears
and tear,
out,
yeah.
your insurance is not going to replace your roof
Nope.
when your roof wears out. So yes, I would suggest that you fund everything at least a percentage on a yearly basis.
Susan, did we answer your question? Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to start planning ahead. For each identified project, the association must identify the anticipated date and cost of the project. This is dealing with your component schedule as well. If you have your component schedule set and you say, oh, we're putting on the roof next year.
Okay, so why would that happen? Let's talk this through.
Okay.
Let's take your example.
All
So start again.
Okay, so they're saying the association that you're dealing
I'm
with,
the CAM. I've come to you.
and you're saying that you're going to put a new roof on the condo building next year
So why?
because it needs it.
How
So
do
we
they
have
know
to-
they need it? How do we get to this point?
Because they've had so many repairs, they're wasting money on repairs instead of replacement.
Got it.
Okay. So then I, in turn, or the reserve study professional, would ask you to identify the project and give me any bids or invoices that you have for that project.
What if I say, I don't know, I'm so new to this community, it's a completely new board, and we just got a turnover from another manager, and they didn't give us anything.
Then that's when we start.
And let me tell you, that is not uncommon.
Oh, that's very common.
That's
very
probably
common.
70% of the situations we
Yes.
find ourselves
And
in.
that is why if you contract someone that has a good network of vendors, you will have a better advantage to get a good current cost. All right, let me just plug that real
Well,
quick.
and also why we say keep your team in place, or at least try to have competent counsel, have competent experts, because the boards turn over year to year to year. It's very important to have a good relationship with your CAM, your accountant, your lawyer, and your experts that do your replacement cost evaluations, your insurance broker. It's important to have consistency.
It is. It is very important.
Okay, so
because
now-
because all of these vendors and all these professionals, they get to know your association. They get to know your building. It's not the people, it is the building, it is the property, it's the amenities. They get to know when this is going to come due. They get to know what condition your amenities are in and what to plan for on a higher scale of knowledge will come from knowing more about the association. That's why, and I do want to say this, that's why the more information you can give your reserve study specialist, the better. If they don't need it, they'll put it in a file and they'll keep it. Flood them with information.
But haven't you had instances, I know, because we work quite a bit together.
Yes.
We've had instances where, unfortunately, you start the project with one board, the information you get is not accurate.
Correct. Now, sometimes that happens. Not all the time. We've had 2 instances of that. But thankfully, we have permit sites that we can go find when the roof was
Good.
done. We have vendors, like if we know that it's a certain condo on the beach, we ask our vendors, do you know who put the roof on that?
Great.
Can you get me an invoice from when it was done? Then we can go through the process of compounding the inflation, checking out to see if we need any other additional things such as the mobilization and things of that nature.
But if there's no information,
If there's no information.
I've gone to telling my associations and working with their reserve specialists to say, now's probably a time to either get an engineer out or a
Yes.
contractor. And yes, unfortunately, it becomes expensive at times, but for them to actually go and look at the roof to see what, because oftentimes it's that useful life. We shouldn't really be guessing at the useful life.
No, and we don't guess.
Well, I know
Yeah,
you don't.
we don't
I'm
guess.
saying that to the cams out
Yeah.
there, that because we do fall into these scenarios where there is some guesswork out there. That's the importance of hiring experts.
Exactly, and we don't guess. We will bring in, we will suggest that you bring in an engineer if necessary. We also have vendors that can do roof condition inspections that
Wonderful.
can give us a good idea of how much longer the roof has got. If we don't have an installation date, we don't list it because we don't want to put any false information down.
Got it. Okay.
And I mean, it's that simple. If we do not know for a specific time that, this roof was replaced in December of 2010, then that line will be blank
Okay.
because there's no need in giving false information. And then when the roof is replaced, that line will get filled in.
So then, to not digress, so we're having our CAM to
Right.
reserve specialist conversation. So you
Right.
ask for all the information, and we're one of the 30% that have all of our information.
20.
And now I give you all the information.
Right.
Then what happens?
Right.
To plan
so,
ahead.
So after After that, and again, this is our system. There's a lot of different systems out there. We fabricated this system, formulated the system because it seemed to be the best way to go. It keeps the board involved, it keeps the CAM involved, it keeps everybody in a transparent basis to know what is happening.
So let's go back to your slide. So,
slide. So well, actually, I wasn't going with the whole report. I was talking about the replacement of the roof.
Right.
So, say you have an estimated remaining useful life of your roof for 10 years.
And I hope everybody out there, because this is what's a little different with the webinar, that everybody understands what that means. Means that you've got 10 more years until you have to fully replace.
Correct.
What happens, and I'm sorry to digress again, but these are the questions that come up all the time. What about a community where they have several different roofs? Because oftentimes there are some townhomes that are like condos, HOAs that are quasi-condos, and you just don't have one roof. The roof's useful life can be different from building to building. And we have several associations that have more than one common element roof.
Right, and that falls underneath an administrative tactic. What we do is we phase those roofs out.
Wonderful.
So you have Building A listed to be replaced in 2025. You have Building B listed to be replaced in 2027. You have Building C and so on. So you can phase those out. You can phase out any component that needs to be phased. You can phase out parking lots. You can phase out parking decks. You can phase out carports. If you have multiple piers, anything that you have multiple of, you can phase those out by year.
Wonderful. So in this scenario, one of the roofs has a remaining useful life of 10 years, and in 2020, in order to replace it, the replacement cost is $50,000. Is that $50,000? Talk to us about the $50,000.
Okay, the $50,000, let's see, need to have $50,000 to pay for the replacement. Okay. 10 years. This is a very low thing. 10 years to replace that $50,000. You're going to add the 3% inflation per year.
So So in this scenario, if they will have to replace their roof in 2030, and when they replace their roof in 2030,
it's going to have the inflation cost.
But it should cost $50,000,
right,
is what we're saying.
That's what the example that we're using.
Okay.
So your current cost is going to be less than that. It's going to be the 3% uncompounded through the 10 years. And I don't have my calculator. I do the math for you, but you can get the general idea. So you're going to need to put away $5,000 this year, $5,000 plus the 3% next year,
right,
and so on. And that is on your one line item. And that's how you prepare without worrying about the special assessment. This roof example is a perfect example of doing the contingency we talked about in the beginning. If you did a 5% contingency, if you have, say you have a 50-unit tower, and you have 3 people that are delinquent. You got 1 in foreclosure, you got 2 that are delinquent. So you're not collecting assessments. That 5% contingency on that roof is going to give you the safety net to replace the roof so the rest of the association does not suffer.
And then the other important point on this slide is reserve and operating funds may not be commingled for more than 30 days from the date of receipt of a maintenance fee payment. Please go into detail about that.
Where are you at?
Bottom, right here.
Okay, more than 30 days from the date of receipt. So, and this is, the CAMs learned this in CAM class. The reserve funding must be moved from operating after the assessments to the reserve fund account within 30 days. Or you're against the administrative code.
Yeah, yep.
The administrative code. I knew it was one of the codes, I just didn't know which one. So that's one of the responsibilities of the CAM. And of course, when you took your CAM license, you learned all that, which may have been yesterday, it may have been 20 years ago. But as long as you move that money over, and that is really the only time it's allowed to be moved from operating to reserves unless it is an annual, when they have an excess in the annual budget.
Oh, the rollover, the
rollover,
surplus.
yes. And that's a whole nother class there.
Yes.
So, but it needs to be moved from when you receive the assessment from the unit owners, from the operating to the reserve within 30 days.
So to simplify it, if owners are listening and for the CAMs, you come up with your $300 a month assessment for the owners to pay. They pay that monthly. But that $300 includes your operating budget and expenses along with your reserve. It's
Correct.
combined. So when they pay it to the association, it's the association's duty through their CAM or bookkeeper to separate that money and ensure that the reserve portion of that assessment goes to the reserve account, and then the operating account only keeps what's necessary for the operating budget. And that's very important because you have to reconcile that within 30 days.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you're commingling the funds, which you cannot do.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to the next.
What we got, this is a hard one to explain.
Okay, so let me just caution everyone. Terminology is king.
Yes. We've learned that.
And you will hear the same phrase being used in the same, or two different phrases being used in the same sentence to mean the same thing. Did that come out?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just looking at, and if you see me looking down, I'm not checking my emails. I'm actually looking at another slide and some of the legal things. So
Yeah,
I'm not,
she's adding some safety nets here to keep us all on track. Okay, so fully funded versus 100% funded. Now, these are my definitions to make it as plain as possible so people can understand, because there's a lot of, you will talk to some reserve studies professionals that will call it fully funded and some that will call it 100% funded. Fully funded is your goal. It is your ideal. It is satisfying one's conception of what is perfect and most suitable. That is your fully funded balance. It is the most suitable balance for community as a particular point in time. In other words, if you're going to need $100,000 in 5 years, if you are fully funded, you will have that $100,000 in 5 years. My definition of 100% funded means that you're going to have all the money that you're ever going to need to replace within the 30 years. 100% funded is never going to happen. Fully funded is. You can be fully funded on the items that need to be replaced at a certain time, but not be past a certain percentage. Now let me elaborate on that. If your reserve balance is $300,000 and next year you have to put on a roof that is $200,000, if you are on pooled, which we will get into again in a minute, if you are on pooled, then you will have the money for that roof, which means you are fully funded for that roof. If you are on straight line and you need $100,000 in that roof and you only have $50,000, then you are not fully funded on that roof. So fully funded is the ideal. It is what is going to keep your association from having special assessments. It is also the most desirable. It is the goal. It's the unicorn, so to speak, to get to.
It's the statutory requirement.
You want to be fully funded. Because, again, that is going to help with your property values, your insurance policy. It's going to help with your state requirements. I mean, you need to be fully funded, if nothing else but on the statutory mandatory reserves.
Right. However, you can reduce and or waive that, but only with unit owner vote. And only the owners can waive or reduce the funding. Another important note is, once funded, reserve funds and any interest accruing, a lot of CAMs unfortunately mess this up, but the interest must remain in the reserve account.
Yes.
The interest can't go to the operating account. And I see for whatever reason, obviously not intentionally, but it does get messed up on the budget somehow. I tend to catch that. So it's very important that any interest accruing on the reserve account remain in the reserve account. And the only way that that can be moved, altered, is by vote of the unit owners. It's also important to note that in addition, all reserve and operating funds must be maintained in the association's name. I've had a weird scenario where the reserve account somehow, the account was in the president's name, and then the president passed, and I don't know how it happened, but I'm kind of dealing with that situation right now.
Yes, the bank account should be held by the association entity itself.
Period. Also, reserve and operating funds of an association may be commingled for investment purposes only, and that's in 718-11114. I get a lot of questions about it. It's a little confusing, but it is listed out in the statute, but only for investment purposes. And when commingled for investment purposes, the funds must be accounted for separately.
Okay, so now we're down to pooled and component funding, which someone said they had a question about earlier. We said we would get to this. So Florida law allows for two types of reserve funding. Pooled, which is also referred to as cash flow analysis, and component, which is referred to also as straight line funding. Like I said, the terminology is explicitly important with these things. Half of the state calls it cash flow, half of the state calls it pooled.
Right.
Half of the state calls it straight line, half of it calls it component. So the pooled funding.
And you can only have pool. You can only pool with vote of the unit owners. I just want to put that out there.
Okay. Pooled funding is when you have one reserve account that entails all of the components. Now, you will still have a component schedule. It won't say just reserves and you can do whatever you want.
Right.
It doesn't, you can't go all willy-nilly like that.
Right.
It has to be laid out in a component schedule to entail all of these different items. And in that respect, if you need to replace something that's not on that schedule, then you have to make the necessary changes to that before you can fund that component on pooled.
That's correct.
Okay. Component or straight line means that you have different accounts for each component. You've got $10,000 in your roof account. You got $20,000 in your pool account. You got $5,000 in your road account. All of that is accounted for as separate line items.
Correct.
And 9 times out of 10, you have separate bank accounts for the different components.
Correct.
Now, not all associations do that. They may have a major component account, and then they may have a extra component account, and then a few other accounts for the other different components. But that is still an example of straight line.
Nevertheless, you have to keep the accounting.
Exactly. You have to keep up with how much money is in each one of those account lines, or you're going to get in all kinds of trouble. The advantages to pooled accounts. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages on both aspects. I favor pooled accounts.
And most association boards and CAMs will also give preferential treatment to pooled accounts.
Yes.
It gives less control to owners. So from an owner's perspective, the pooled account may not be great if you don't have a ton of trust in your board of directors and or your management.
Absolutely. But the pooled account also gives you more flexibility as far as replacing your components.
That is correct.
In a timely manner. So let me give you an example of why a pooled schedule is better than a straight line schedule.
For the business.
For the business, from the business aspect. Well, actually from the owner's aspect. They currently have $20,000 in their account for the pool, which means that they are $6,000 short for replacing that pool. I'm going to say this year. Let me say this year. They're going to need to replace it this year. So they're $6,000 short. Even though in their fencing account they have $42,000.
Right.
But their fence is only going to cost $10,000. they're going to have a special assessment of $6,000 divided among the units for that pool resurfacing because they are on straight line.
Right.
You cannot use your fence money to resurface your pool if you're on straight line.
Without a vote of the owners.
Without a vote of the owners. And
However,
good luck with that.
Right. However, if they were a pooled account.
If you were a pooled account, then all of that would be in one basket. All those eggs would be in one basket, and you could take out whatever eggs you needed to resurface that pool without having a special assessment.
And or the need of a unit owner vote.
Right. And it simplifies and streamlines things. But as Erum said, you have to have trust in your board.
Because they could utilize some of the money for capital expenditures or deferred maintenance that maybe the owners don't agree with.
Correct.
And that is sort of the reasoning behind the statute requiring owner vote, because it's their money that's being held. Although the pooled accounts do tend to give greater flexibility in time of need. So for instance, with COVID going on right now, it's very difficult to get unit owner vote. It's something that we're working through because it's difficult to get owners all in one room, to obtain the necessary vote, so on and so forth. So if that money were needed right now and it were straight line, we would have to do a special assessment.
Exactly.
So a pooled would be very advantageous due to the flexibility in times of need when you really do need the money.
Correct.
Especially in disasters.
Right.
During hurricanes.
But on the other side of that coin, a pooled reserve schedule also lessens the accountability unless you put in place certain criteria for the accounting methods of your community managers and your board.
Right.
So you can customize the requirements if you want to go to pooled and streamline things. As far as the component schedule or the component straight line method, the straight line method is again straightforward. You've got X amount of money in each line and that's all you've got until you build it up. Which another negative aspect of having the straight line method is if you don't have enough funding, if you experience 5 or 10 years of votes to underfund a certain line item and then all of a sudden it needs replacing, then you don't have the capabilities at that point in time to do a special assessment, then that component is going to deteriorate to the point of potentially messing up the aesthetic of the association, lowering property values, especially if it's something as big as a pool or a clubhouse.
Right.
Lowering property values, and then your insurance company, I'm sure, your carriers are going to have questions about things like that. So, straight line method it's a lesser advantageous way of doing your accounting.
And would modernization and those things come in with pool resurfacing?
Yes.
Because oftentimes then associations will be like, oh, well, we want the pool to look better, so we kind of want to aesthetically change the look. Well, that could potentially be modernizing. And always remember, when these projects are happening, don't do material alterations without the vote of the owner. So there's little hiccups and pitfalls throughout the process of doing this.
Correct. And you're using the pool as an example. Yes, say your pool is 20 years old and when you resurface it you want to replace the tile and make it look prettier. That can be figured in on your cost for modernization of the pool area. So
but it's not figured into the deferred maintenance, because
Exactly.
when you're doing deferred maintenance, it is for like kind.
Yes.
Going back to exactly how it was originally designed.
Right.
So which is why it is very important to have all I can impart is qualified experts should be doing this with you. If you have a legal budget, you should be talking to your counsel with regards to budgeting, reserves, financials, and voting are two of the biggest things in an association where owners have the most rights. And it's interesting with reserves, capital improvements, projects, replacement, it ties into both. It's their finances and it is also their voting.
Yes.
Right. So just always be very careful. And what's interesting is until it's a really bad situation, it's one of the areas that I get the least questions at the onset, and I have not been able to figure out why. We get so many questions about holding board meetings and things like that, a lot less on budgeting. And I know how frustrating it is for your replacement or your reserve study experts, where it's like, well, we're not doing their budget, and their budget doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I just think it's with turnover, different people touching, treasurers sometimes put the budgets together, different bookkeepers, and there's always a different method, but it should all be the same.
It should be. And you know, there's a terminology that we use. It's called kicking the can down the road. You know, this is not forefront in their mind about what's going to happen 5 years from now. You know, most unit owners have the mindset that they don't need to worry about this. That's what the association is for, and they don't quite understand the, I guess you would say, the line of
the business aspect of it. That's why
the procedural line,
right,
of how you get to that point to replace that component. They think that, oh, they're paying their assessments and that should cover it, and it shouldn't increase, it shouldn't change. That's just how it's going to be. But they don't. You know, it's also not understood that all of this changes through time, through construction cost increases, through national events, through natural events. Everything has a bearing on what happens with these assessments.
Well, just like the cost of milk, it's always going to increase.
Exactly.
Depending on different variables, but what something cost in 1980 is not what it's going to cost in 2020. So for us experts in this industry, it's baffling that people want to keep their assessments the same. And that's the kickback. We don't have money for this. We don't have money for that, but they don't want to increase their assessments. If you don't increase your assessments, if you don't continue to do these things, your property value will decrease, and you will likely end up in an association living in a property that is not worth really much.
Exactly. Your property values are going to go down. So that brings us to what we're talking about right here.
Right.
Now, let's just touch on something that's not on your slide. What is wrong with a special assessment? There are many associations that operate on, oh, well, we'll need this in 10 years. We'll do a special assessment in 10 years, and we won't worry about it. Well, if you have any sort of financial background whatsoever, you can borrow here and pay interest, or you can save here and gain interest. Now, to me, this one is far better than this one. And anybody that has a financial background can understand that. Anybody that's managed your own household funds can understand that. Also, by deferring a project, you are simply budgeting for a more expensive replacement. Because if you don't replace it now when you need it, and you want to replace it 3 years from now, you're going to have that 3% compounded inflation. Plus, you know, the gods only know how much more percentage is going to be added onto that depending on what the current events are. So it's cheaper and easier to collect the needed funds at the time,
Right.
over the time, than it is to do it right when it's needed. So I just wanted to make that. Now, in that same respect, I want to tell you a tiny little story.
Should I go to the last slide?
Not yet.
Okay.
And this is, if any of you know me, you know my history geek is going to come out. So, special assessment casualties.
Yes.
So, I call them SACs. Now, if you have any sort of knowledge of St. Augustine, the city, then you know that Drake raided St. Augustine back in the 1600s. He came through, he burned the city, he took the children as slaves. I mean, there's just all sorts of really, really bad things that happened. He stole all the gold, he commandeered all the boats, he took all their food and completely sacked the city. So a special assessment casualty to me would be a sack. A special assessment casualty would be foreclosure. Because someone came in, they bought a unit, 2 months later, they had an $8,000 special assessment. They were barely making their mortgage as it was because they overextended a bit. So now they're in foreclosure. So now the association not only has a special assessment that they have to handle and a replacement that they have to deal with, but now they have a foreclosure that they're not gaining any assessments off of. Which in turn, if they have a contingency on their whatever they needed replaced, is going to handle that. But if they don't, then they're doubly indemnified on that.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I would call a special assessment casualty.
Okay.
And that's a SAC. You
Right.
don't want any SACs.
No, you don't.
All right, so now we're down to the last slide. 3 things to remember. Plan, execute, and invest. Plan for the future. Plan, make your plan. Set the goals. Set what you're going to need to replace these components. Execute it. Execute it in a timely manner. Don't give that roof an extra 2 years because you're going to be repairing it, which is going to cost you more money. Don't let that parking lot have a few potholes in it, and extend it another 5 years because somebody is going to damage their vehicle. You are
Get
going
hurt.
to get hurt. You are going to get larger potholes, which is going to cost more money to fix.
And you may not have insurance for these events.
Exactly. And then you invest. You take your reserve account and you invest it. Find a good financial planner. Find one that specializes at your bank in condominium investments and investment brokerage.
Yes.
And invest your reserve account because you can take $50,000 that you've got in your roof account and in 10 years you can have double that.
With little liability,
Exactly.
if you go to the right financial advisor.
Yes.
And,
And we're not promoting any advisors. We're just saying find a good one.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Can we tell everybody, because I'm getting a lot of emails. I have about 50 emails. Of
Oh, wow.
those, unfortunately, that could not log on. I think we would have had a lot more attending today. Next, we are holding another seminar next week, replacement cost valuation. I think we're going to a webinar format that may work a little bit better with having people log on. We're kind of working through how we're going to give these educational seminars and through the best format. People are asking in what category they are going to get their CU credit, and I believe you said insurance or
It's finance and insurance.
finance and insurance.
And operational, whatever the operational thing is.
So we will, when we send the certificates or when she puts it in, if somebody wants it in a specific category, write us that within finance, insurance, and operational. The upcoming ones, the ones where Kistemaker Business Law Group, through Erum Kistemaker, the legislative update, the fines and suspensions, the condo HOA, board certifications, those are all elective credits and legal. So just to give everybody a heads up on that, we have a lot of seminars coming up.
Now I do want to say that we will be on the website under News tab. Okay.
Oh, okay. So our presentation will also be on my website at Kistemaker it's DaytonaBusinessLawyers.com. You can also Google Kistemaker Business Law Group. We will put this presentation on our website under the News tab with the materials provided by expert inspectors through Anastasia, who is providing the credit for this. We are both qualified through the division as education providers.
Yes.
We were vetted and had to go through a process for that. Will it also
And
be
so-
on your website?
It can be on our website.
It will also be on all my social media, my Facebook. I think just my Facebook, correct?
Yeah, so we'll tweet out the link to it'll be on YouTube as well, and we'll tweet out the link to YouTube or the website link too. So it'll be across all, Twitter,
And
LinkedIn,
I find
Facebook.
that I have really liked webinars, especially for my legal CLEs, because you're able to go back to the videos with the materials
Right.
and hear what the teachers were saying along with your materials. So it is important for you to be able to access this video over time along with your materials, and also to gather our contact information information if you have any questions.
Correct. And you can always contact either one of us if you have questions. And next week's seminar on the replacement cost valuations is a completely different thing than reserve studies. I wanted to make that very clear because that seems to be a huge point of confusion. The reserve studies is for your financial health, and the replacement cost valuation is for your insurance health, not one and the same.
Anything else? I'm just trying to think. Oh, I think it would also be advantageous for CAMs. Show this video to your board members on their free time. They can read through it. They'll understand why you're asking them to get a reserve study. They can watch it on their free time. Maybe something you can do for the board. Send it out. They can watch it at their next board meeting.
Absolutely. And that's a great educational thing for the boards, because most of the time boards are brought together and they're normal people. You know, they haven't had the training and they haven't heard the terminology. They don't quite grasp until you help them. They don't quite grasp what this all entails.
And Anastasia and I and both of our companies are also willing to do more in-depth sessions with particular management companies that have several CAMs. We are flexible. Our goal is really to educate everybody in our community in this area, because with education there's less disputes, and it improves our community as a whole. If we've got lovely properties, we've got a lovely community, and people want to come to our community. So this is really community-driven, education-driven, and
above all else, it is all for the protection of the association.
Yes. And the board members, so you don't end up in a scenario where you're getting sued and the camps.
Right. I mean, it's all for everyone's protection and to keep the aesthetic going. Because this is Florida. This is what we do.
One thing that we would ask is, if you did like our educational webinar, please go write something on Facebook or on our websites or on Google, so that will encourage others to take their time out of their day to watch these. We are really trying to limit it to hour and a half, so we stick to the lunch and learn. I think this is very convenient. You guys can eat your lunch at your desk while watching this. Please send us any critique. We are strong women. We will not be offended. We want this to be a wonderful experience for everybody, and we want to have 100 people at our next one. So
yes, we do.
Thank you again for joining us. Have a great weekend, and happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there.
Have a good day.